is an A-ranked researcher, which places him in the top 6% of business and economics researchers in New Zealand, a fellow of the Royal Society of Te Parangi, hope I said that okay, but impressively a black belt. And I'd like to welcome Professor Lisa Jackson Pulver, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Strategy and Services at the University of Sydney and is joining us from Sydney. Lisa is a proud Aboriginal woman whose experience extends beyond higher education into the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Medical Council. Lisa has received extensive honours and recognition for her work in medicine and public health, including an Australian Military Service Medal for service to education, a Vice-Chancellor's Award for Teaching Excellence, not one but 2 Dean's Awards, and the Henry Stryker Community Honour for outstanding service and contribution rendered with endeavours to make our society a better place to live.
So I've actually done research on this. Aronga Takirua is the Maori name for the double cultural shift. And what we found actually looking at academics and plenty of wahine or women in our study is academics often feel beyond their typical role, and we've talked about here about the research and the teaching and the administration, the technology, the new training. They also had to act as cultural navigators and explainers for their non-Indigenous colleagues, and all of that work was just extra sandwiched in to to help everybody else on the team at the expense of their own work. And we had scientists saying things like, oh, and I lose lab time because I just can't do everything. And so I do think those are a reality for Indigenous academics. I'm sure it'll be a similar thing it's one of those interesting kind of curses, right? As Indigenous or Aborigine culture gains more prominence, you're then starting to drag a very small number of Indigenous academics into multiple roles. And of course, they're just like, oh my gosh, I wish I could clone myself, but I believe that kind of science isn't quite here yet. So it's, and it's this kind of, we found the cultural responsibility to do those roles is hard on Indigenous academics, because they think if I don't do it, they'll send it to a non-Indigenous person. And then I think, oh my gosh, that guy will make a mess of it. And so, yes, there is evidence, at least from New Zealand. And back to you there, Lisa. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora. Look, all of that, we have a variety of different sorts of roles in the Australian context, and some of them are Indigenous identified roles, where people who are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people have a genuine qualification to apply for that role. And there is a very significant cultural load on that, because when you put people into those sorts of roles, you are expecting that as part of the job on the whole, right? It's not always the case, but on the whole. So I'm speaking generalisations. Then you've got a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are working in institutions in roles across the sector, in every capability you can possibly imagine, who are not in identified roles, but still are expected to stand up, are still expected to know everything about everything that you could imagine, far beyond what any other human being is expected to know, and often have to end up being defenders of things, unlike any other nation in the world where, we recognise the absolute difficulty of that. There was a time until fairly recently where the sole Aboriginal person in a group would be expected to do the acknowledgement of country, or be wrongly asked to do a welcome to country, or can you tell us some Dreamtime stories, please, or can you, help us understand what's going on, and suddenly become a cultural competence or a cultural safety expert. And I find all of that to be an incredibly difficult thing. And this is load that is not really recognised. You can't take your skin off at night and hang it up on the door when you leave the office. You are Aboriginal or you're not. You're a Maori or not. You're a Torres Strait Islander or not. You just don't peel that off when the business day ends. And sometimes it can be incredibly exhausting. And certainly in Australia at the moment, with the debate about matters such as constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and some of the stuff that's happening there in the media, some of the commentary that's happening. You know, many of us are targets of hate speech, myself included. There's a reason why I work at home a little more often than I used to do, as is the same for many in the sector who are talking about the voice, for example. And it's not just about the voice, but it's about a whole swag of other things, including treaty and recognition, and how we can get the truth of our history really embraced by Australians, because we see how strongly our nation hurts and how much love we have for our nation and how much we want to move into the future embracing all parts of who we are as a society. So all of this is a very heavy load. And no matter what's happening in the environment at the moment does affect us all. And most particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you know, along with the other responsibilities and concerns that we have in the community context. I'll finish off with one other little thing as well. It's only recently where Aboriginal people have been embraced by society. It's only recently where we've actually had graduates in university. It's only just last week that our very first PhD in Australia, Aboriginal PhD in Australia, passed away. And he received his PhD in the 90s, as in the 1990s, not the 1890s, kia ora, you know, 1990s. And since then, there's been lots and lots of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people going through university and going through the vocational sector. But they're very recent times. Right, they're decades. They're in my memory. In, you know, when I was a young girl, you know, there were lots of permissions that people had to have. We were not part of the group. We were more assimilated into society than those who were living on missions or having to live in homes because they were part of the forced removals. But it's only recent times that Aboriginal people have been embraced in workplaces such as those that we have. It's in my generation that this has happened. And I think it hasn't been able to adapt suitably and rapidly enough to be able to take concerns and the needs of the emotional kickback that always having to be the one that explains things. So you go home from work and you explain to your family what you do in the office because there's not the lived experience. Or if you're the first in family to go to university, you explain what campus life is about. Because, you know, there's no reference structure for that. You know, you explain to people how to use, you know, online systems, you know, like, and we can all relate to that because it's all fairly new and certainly within our lifetimes. Imagine doing that about every part of your life. Imagine doing that, you know. So, and this is what we have with our young people today. You know, the responsibilities upon them all is really huge. And, you know, I don't know if there is a direct comparison with the level of cognitive load that is on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's a biggie, and I have not got the words to express it, so I'll look forward to some of you clever people publishing some more on this. It's a biggie.